Okay, welcome to another edition of the Lessons of War. Let's get to our next lesson. This will be lesson number 5. Um, as you remember the previous lessons, learning about yourself and being a better person, mindset mattering, leadership matters, the average person matters. Today, we're going to talk about the consequences of every action and inaction you take. Tomorrow is going to be the last 3 about the bigger picture of war, how it hurts everyone, how it should improve the world, and how it can be a solution. But let's get to lesson 5. These are the consequences for every action and inaction that you take. And I want to start with talking about the Armenian genocide. That's right, the Armenian genocide. If you've ever heard of it or not heard of it, probably not heard of it. We don't spend a lot of time on it. But you can see here the Armenian genocide takes place between 1915 and 1923. And it is the perpetrators are the Islamic Turks, and the victims are the Christian Armenians. The Turks and the Armenians have never gotten along, and when World War I starts, it really was an excuse for the Turks to do something about the problem of the Armenians that they'd seen for many, many years. And so they decided to start killing them. You see on this map, the red dots are the size of the massacres that took place. And you can see they're multiple across the country, some of them bigger than others. You'll see these dotted lines here represent when people were moved for the purpose of being killed. So yes, many, like 1 million people, give or take some. We're not really sure how many were killed, but the Islamic Turks killed our Christian Armenians during this time period during World War I. You can see by some of these photographs, maybe they look very similar to photographs that you might recognize from the Holocaust. Certainly we know a lot about the Holocaust, and we see that in a lot of places, but in the Armenian genocide, that's not the case. And so certainly there are consequences for the actions of the soldiers and the Islamic Turks who killed all of these people. But there's also consequences for inactions people took. Like look at down at the bottom left-hand corner, there's this photograph of Armenians being marched away right through the middle of a town. And so certainly all the people who lived in this town had some recognition of what was going on, and did nothing about it. One person that did do something about it was this guy, Armin Wegener. If you're interested in more about his story, you can click on one of the links on the left-hand side of the Moodle screen and you can learn about him. But he was a German medic, and he saw what was going on, and so he smuggled a camera into some of these camps where the massacres were taking place, and he took some photographs and then smuggled the camera back out and had the pictures published for the world to see. So that's risking his life to get the story out. Many people like to pretend like we didn't know what was going on during the Armenian genocide, but thanks to people like Armin Wegener, we did know what was going on, and most people did nothing about it. And Wegener didn't do anything besides that, but he was a hero when it comes to that, so we'll give him some credit. This guy in the far right is Leslie Davis. He was the American diplomat in Turkey at the time, and he had visited some of the camps and sites and knew what was going on, and let the American government back home know what was going on, and asked for them to do something. But as you probably guessed, the American government did nothing to step in and stop the killings here in Turkey. And so here are again our consequences for the inaction that the world had taken. When World War II breaks out and Hitler begins to punish the Jews in Germany and Eastern Europe, this man, Armin Wegener, writes a letter to Hitler and says, please don't do this. You know, we saw the same thing happen against the Armenians. You know, we probably shouldn't do the same thing. And Hitler's response was that he learned a different lesson. He asked the question, who remembers the Armenian genocide now? And of course, the answer was no one. Nobody really cared. And so the lesson Hitler learned from this was that you could do these insane, evil things, and no one is going to stop. No one's going to stop you. And so certainly that's a great, I think, piece of evidence for lesson 5, that there are consequences for your actions and inactions. Let me tell you this story about Henry Tandy. Henry Tandy was a British soldier during World War I, and here he is, right here in the painting. He's got this wounded British soldier on his back. It's kind of a famous painting about the British in World War I, and um, it's not it's not that famous, but people know of it. And um, he just Henry Tandy fought in the war, and that was it. He went home and lived a normal life. When World War II breaks out, the British Prime Minister goes to visit Hitler in Europe to try to prevent World War II from occurring, and goes into Hitler's house or office or whatever, and he sees this painting. The British Prime Minister is visiting Hitler, and he sees Hitler has this painting hanging on his wall. And so Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, says, Mr. Hitler, why do you have a picture of these British soldiers on your wall? And Hitler says, you see this guy? He saved my life. And so Chamberlain's like, oh, come on. What are you talking about? And Hitler says, yeah, I got wounded in a battle during World War I, and I was stumbling back to the safety of my line, and this British soldier popped out with a gun and pointed it at me. But when he saw that I was wounded, he let me go. So Chamberlain really couldn't believe this, but when he went home, he looked up Henry Tandy and he asked him, did you ever let go a wounded German soldier? And Tandy was like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. And he said, you let Hitler go. So all of this is a true story, and I don't know what the right answer to this is, because certainly you should let someone go if they're wounded, right? Or should you let them go if they're wounded, if they're Hitler? Who knows? And who knows what Hitler was going to do at that point? So certainly there's consequences of Henry Tandy's inaction, and this makes war even more complex, because sometimes you do what you think you're supposed to do, whether it be killing or not killing or whatever, and then it turns out that it's the wrong thing to do. That's the story of Henry Tandy and the consequence of his inaction. I'd like you to watch these videos that are down below. Some of them might be working, others will. You can look up your own, but these are from a TV show called What Would You Do? That was on ABC. And you could watch, they put these different scenarios and watch what people did in response. So I'd like you to watch some of these, at least the ones that I have down below on Moodle. Watch those and think about some of these things too while you're watching those and doing your assignment today. Like, what are the consequences of you saying hello to people in the hall when you make eye contact? Or what are the consequences when you don't? What if you ignore people? What's the consequence of that? Well, what about things like racism and sexism in the country? If you know those exist or you see them happening and you do nothing to stop them, is there consequence for that inaction? And certainly in elections and war, like if you don't vote, is there a consequence for that? If you do vote, there's certainly consequences for the people you vote for, and certainly in war. So think about those things, watch those videos, and do the assignment that is scheduled for today, and then we will catch you up with lessons 6, 7, and 8 tomorrow. We'll finish the lessons of World War I and all wars. Thank you.